Okay, Colin Liddell, did you pay any attention to the presidential debate last night in the United States?
Yeah, of course. People have been looking forward to this event for months now, and of course we expected a great deal from these two towering rhetorical geniuses. It was a bit like watching Demosthenes versus Cicero, I thought.
Very much. Or at the very least, it was like Lincoln versus Douglas.
Round about that level, yeah, obviously. No, but to be perfectly honest, it was a bit of a shit show. It was a lot of sound and fury signify nothing. And I think that the debate wasn't really happening at an intellectual level. It was more at a gestural level. I think Trump was actually quite controlled in a lot of the things he did during the debate. He avoided saying a lot of things. He avoided a lot of rhetorical traps. And he was focusing more on just presenting a strong, energetic image. And I think this is probably because I think most white voters have already made up their minds, and I think this is more about the non-white vote. I think that's what he's probably aiming at. The real floating voters in this election are probably the Hispanic vote, and to a lesser extent the black vote. And I think the key thing there is to come over as a big, strong, tough, boorish, loud, dominant personality. And I think if you look at it if you kind of tune out what they're saying and just look at it in a more visceral way, you'll see that Joe Biden's this rather timorous-looking, weak-looking, frail-looking figure. And, even though he's been kind of mollycoddled by Chris Wallace and so on, and Trump is this caudillo figure. He's much more dominant. And, that's the impression that's probably going to be left with a lot of the Hispanic voters. And so I think they'll look at this as a clear victory for Trump. And this will be something that will attract them to vote for Trump. The actual ideas didn't get much of an airing. Both candidates were really kind of talking across each other, avoiding questions, not really going into detail, and not really following chains of logic. So I think it was much more of a kind of gestural contest. And in that, Trump clearly came out very far ahead.
Now, I found it interesting that the upper classes, the pundit classes, our social betters said, oh, this is just like a terrible thing for America. The whole world is laughing at us. This is like the Republic is in great danger. I don't think that these two guys having an undignified debate is much of a threat to the future of America. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think Americans have a kind of a little bit of a cultural cringe, and they feel markedly inferior to Europeans. And so Americans always want to create a good impression to Europe. So they want to have presidential debates where both candidates are very polite, well-spoken, logical, and intellectual. And nobody really cares about that. This is just America's urge to kind of signal to Europe how actually we're just as civilized as you are. That's what that is about. Whatever Americans do, Europeans tend to be a bit dismissive and sniffy about them, and this fits perfectly into that kind of fair framework. So Europeans are quite happy with this debate. It shows the Americans they want to see the Americans as these rather boorish, semi-civilized, colonial yokels. And even if they conducted a very nice, civil, and kind of highly intellectual debate, Europeans would still find some way to see them in those terms.
Now, for the first 2 years of the Trump presidency, one of the dominant comments on his presidency was that Trump is helpless to stop the immigration problem, to stop, in particular, illegal immigration. Then Trump has been very successful in smashing and controlling and reducing significantly illegal immigration, and he has slashed refugee intake. He's been so successful on the immigration issue that it's no longer an issue. People don't talk about it. He doesn't talk about it. It wasn't even raised last night. So perhaps that's the price of his success in dealing with the matter. Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think he doesn't want to bang on too much about the immigration issue because he seems to be angling a large chunk of the Hispanic vote. And while many Hispanics might be quite pleased that, Trump is actually closing down the border to some extent, to have him banging on about it might strike a bum note. So maybe that's probably what's going on there. But this is something that, if this is an achievement, it's something that he's actually, delivered on. He should also be allowed to boast about it a bit.
There's a lot of talk about shy Trump voters because Trump has been steadily trailing in the polls for 2020, and the gap has been pretty significant the last 5 months, and it hasn't varied much. And so supporters of Donald Trump say, oh, they're shy Trump voters who are not going to tell pollsters what's really going on. On the other hand, you have our social bettors who tell you, well, pollsters know their jobs, and they know their jobs better than we know their jobs. And so they adjust for that, and they sample. And these are the professionals, man. You want to trust the professionals, don't you? And much of the Trump base does not trust professionals such as pollsters. Any thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, well, I think most of the polls, as we saw with the previous election, were designed to kind of deflate the Trump vote. And I don't see any reason why that should be any different this time around. I think most of the people that commission these polls are large media companies, and we all know where most of the media stands. So they're quite happy to run polls showing Trump trailing by 6 or 7 points. And I think the most reliable poll would be the Rasmussen poll. And according to that, Biden had a 1% lead. There's been a lot of research done recently about hidden Trump voters. And it seems that that is definitely a thing. And so that's going to give Trump, I think the estimate is an extra 3% that they're simply not picking up at the moment. So I think he's probably ahead of Biden in the popular vote. And of course, when he defeated Hillary, I think he was 2 points down on Hillary when he actually beat her through the Electoral College. So I think Trump's in a better position than he was against Hillary. And I don't think these professionals that you talk about, these pollsters, are working too hard to, get at the truth.
What about on the matter of character? Do you think that Biden has better character than Donald Trump? Do you think perhaps that Donald Trump is just a horrible person?
No, I like Trump. Trump's likable. He seems like a genuine person. He seems very interested in normal people. He seems to be blunt and honest in a kind of a good way, something that's probably, maybe something he gets from his Scottish roots, possibly. Biden, he seemed a bit artificial. Like, I kind of believe the rumors that he's taken some performance-enhancing drug. There's a few rumors that there was a wire so that somebody could feed him, comebacks and lines and tell him which way to steer. I think that's definitely a possibility. So, yeah, I think, obviously Biden had much, much lower expectations. And the fact that Biden turned up at all and actually managed to stay on his feet was a major achievement for him. But, I think this is going to take a toll on Biden, getting in the ring with Donald Trump. And it's going to, I think their best strategy is to try to avoid any more debates, to maybe highlight how uncivil this debate was and how nothing was really achieved. It was just a couple of people shouting at each other. And so I think if they can back out of any further debates, that would probably be their best strategy, because I think if Biden is subjected to these kinds of pressures, it's going to be, it's going to be quite hard on him. And, giving him all these performance enhancing drugs could have disastrous side effects, like he might wet himself on stage, or he might collapse and have a stroke or something like that. That is not outside the realms of possibility.
And what can you tell me about that Mark Collett video where he talks about how much he enjoys driving people to suicide?
Yeah, I know exactly the video you're talking about. I think that was when Mark was going through an emotional, romantic breakup with somebody or other. I assume, that's what it looks like. He's actually the person who's quite close to topping himself at that point. And so I think that's a projection video. I think he's actually projecting how he feels in that particular video. I don't think Mark Collett has driven too many people to suicide.
And what's going on with Millennial Woes and his triumphant return tour?
Yeah, we had this interview with Greg Johnson. I think it must be a couple of weeks ago by now. And since then, yeah, sadly, Woes hasn't really been cranking out the top quality content that he's so well known for, so it is a pity. I posted a kind of sarcastic little video a few days ago where I used a clip to poke a gentle fun at Woes. And yeah, I do these things because I kind of hope it will provoke him into resuming his prolific output. But I don't know. I think Woes is hanging on for the millennials now. It seems like that seems to be the focus of his year. So I think he's saving all his energy for the millennials in December.
So you recently published an essay, Don't Cancel the Woke, Cancel the Imposers of Wokeness. Why is the right wing unable to organize effectively to punish their enemies as compared to the left wing, who are just so good at organizing and carrying out boycotts?
Well, one reason is because when you're boycotting companies and various organizations, the whole principle of it is to focus on a small number of targets. If you focus a lot of pressure on a small number of targets, then those targets will then be forced to retreat and give in some way. And this is what the left does. They pick a company that supports a position or implicitly supports a position that they are against, and they pour a lot of social media pressure on them. This pressure is then picked up and echoed by the actual media as well, which is generally, in sympathy with the left. And so that is a very effective strategy. Now, with the right wing, we've got like almost every company now is woke. So there are simply too many targets. And so if you say, let's boycott any company which is pro-LGBT, you're going to have a pretty hard time because there's too many companies that are pro-LGBT. And so eventually you're going to run out of things, and starve to death possibly. So the problem the right has is like finding and focusing on a limited number of targets to make its point. And so I think you've got to have a kind of hierarchy of companies that you try to boycott, and there are certain principles you can use to do this. So trying to boycott every woke company is never going to work. So you've got to look for special factors. So, for example, in that article, I was focusing on Costco because Costco were attacking one of their suppliers for not being woke. And so companies like that, which actually impose the wokeness on other companies, they suggest themselves as a higher ranking target worthy of a boycott.
Doesn't matter how tall Mark Collett is. And would you say he's about 5'6"?
No, I think he's actually a bit shorter. I think he's about 5'4" to 5'5". That's my guess. And that's with his shoes on.
Okay, and so what can we learn from that? Yeah.
Well, it does matter. It does matter because, short people do tend to have psychological issues. And it does push them to behave in certain ways. There's a lot of data on this. Short RCs tend to be a little bit weird. They have overcompensation issues. And I think we can see some of that in people like, Napoleon and Hitler and Mark Collett, to put him in such exalted company.
So how much do you think physiognomy is destiny?
Well, I think it's definitely a factor in the alternative right. And one of the things I've highlighted in my analysis of the alternative right is that it tends to attract sub-white and sub-masculine people. And somebody like Mark Collett, he is not a typical looking British person. If you want to be kind, you could say he has a Mediterranean appearance. these types of people, I'm talking about the the Alex McNabs, the Mike Enochs, the Eric Strikers, all these off-white people, they are the ones that are, strangely enough, most attracted to this kind of Aryan vision of nationalism. And on the other hand, you have the kind of sub-masculine element. So the alt-right seems to attract two particular groups, sub-masculines and sub-whites. So I think the evidence is overwhelming if you actually take the time and trouble to examine it, as I have done.
And by the way, how tall are you?
Well, I'm actually a giant, especially where I am now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand anyone who doesn't think that height or physiognomy is important. I feel like I can get an immediate sense of a person just by listening to their voice or just by at a glance. I mean, that's the way the real world works. We glance at people and then we decide whether or not to engage with them. I feel when I go to, say, social events, within a minute of meeting a woman, I would usually get a pretty accurate sense of whether I could take her to bed and how much effort I need to put in to accomplish that. I feel like I can usually gauge someone's politics usually just by looking at them. I do think there is a right-wing look and a left-wing look, just as if I walked into somebody's room or saw somebody's desk, that generally speaking, people on the right tend to be a little bit more conscientious, and people on the left tend to be much more seeking for the stuff that is new. And people on the right tend to think, generally speaking, that traditional ways are best. I mean, when I listen to your voice, I hear someone that is not terribly concerned with what, I think about them. You're not like hanging on my every bit of feedback to kind of prop you up in life so that you can feel good about yourself. You're happy to talk to me, but you don't care that much, what I say in response, because your self-esteem does not depend at all on what I'm going to say or what someone in the chat's going to say. You thought long and hard about the things type of things that we've talked about for decades, and so your voice is that of someone who ponders these issues and then is willing to share their thoughts, but it's not the mincing, tiptoeing through the daffodils, don't want to offend, or, want to show off. I mean, I feel like I can get a pretty accurate sense of someone's character within just a few seconds of listening to them. So, yeah, I think voice is important, physiognomy is important, height is important, someone's ethnic, racial, or religious identity tells you something about them. If you know their profession, that tells you a great deal about them, where they live. So if you're interested in people, I don't know why you would not be interested in these things. Anything you want to add on this general discussion?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things about the alt-right is it has enormous entertainment value. It is actually a very highly amusing soap opera. You have all these interesting characters who pop up from time to time, and there's just so much natural comedy in it, and I really enjoy taking an interest in the alternative right and the wider dissident right. Because the characters make it interesting, and I think the characters help people to engage with the ideas as well. So, an abstract idea is a little bit difficult for most people, but when you see all these interesting little dramas that emerge in the dissident right, then you can get drawn in, and then you can sort of start to get a grip of what people are saying, and of course, you can discount for personal drama and who's on whose side, and but I think it generally makes the whole thing more interesting for most people, and it definitely helps to maintain my interest in the alt-right, of which, of course, I'm no longer a part. I see myself as outside that movement, but I, of course, am part of the dissident right.
I'm thinking a good thing about the alt-right being virtually an entirely online movement is that people reveal themselves really quickly, because for many people, there's probably no easier world, no easier society, no easier group in which somebody can make a quicker impact and get followers than by saying something alt-right, because there's such a thirst by, I'd say, about 5% of the American population who's kind of alt-right leaning. There's such a thirst for discussion of these ideas, and it's so little met by the news media that someone of medium talent can jump in and make a disproportionately huge impact. I mean, if Millennial Woes or Mark Collett or myself if we were just talking about traditional safe topics such as Republican Party politics, we'd have a great deal of trouble developing a large following. But if you talk about edgy alt-right topics, you can immediately get, a substantial following if you have any talent whatsoever. And then for the people who are willing to go out on the line to talk about something so edgy, they're usually going to be edgy characters themselves. And so everybody gets revealed really quickly. There isn't a lot of mystery about the main characters in and around the alt-right. Any thoughts?
Yeah, but the main thing is still the ideas. I mean, the mainstream media is leaving this large area of intellectual ideas about society and what makes a healthy and a good society. They're just completely ignoring this whole sector. And so the ideas are the key thing. And of course, the characters that emerge in the alt-right and the dissident right are these people who are prepared to go into that kind of taboo wasteland where normal commentators fear to tread. And there are some advantages that you've pointed out, and of course there's lots of disadvantages as well. But basically, you need these people who often have kind of marginal personalities to explore that region of ideas, because the mainstream culture is simply neglecting that. And these are very vital ideas. These are ideas that pertain to the continued existence of our civilization. And it's a kind of travesty that this area is not being treated seriously by our culture and our civilization.
What's going on with Japanese politics? They've got a new prime minister, I believe.
Yeah, I hadn't really noticed. This guy hasn't made any impression on me, to be honest. So we'll see. Japan's a pretty shut down country with regard to the outside world. Inside Japan, it's more like the Swedish model, but with regard to the outside world, it's a bit more like the Edo period again.
So I was looking at Nick Fuentes' stream last night. He was covering the debates. He had over 33,000 live viewers. And whatever one thinks of Nick Fuentes, he is tremendously entertaining. Like, he is witty. He is fun. He's kind of an exciting figure that does compel attention. And it's an astounding number of live viewers on DLive. The platform is a terrible platform. Like, people have a hard time watching things on DLive. The technology is quite mediocre, and yet 33,000 up to 36,000 at one point people were willing to endure the horrible technological platform of DLive to tune into Nick Fuentes. That's quite a large amount. Any thoughts on the success of Nick?
Yeah, that's very interesting because, Nick was booted off of YouTube, and it seems like he's taken a large chunk of his audience with him to alt tech, if we can really call DLive alt tech. Yeah, there's some people, they have followings, and wherever they go, those followings will, or a large chunk of those followings will follow them. So that's quite good news. I think, we need to see more platforms. We need to see more competition in the marketplace. And if and when that happens, somebody like YouTube is going to be in deep shit. Yeah,
and it's just like this kid's only like 21, and yet he's able to develop such a huge following. I want to read a little bit from your essay, Chinese Burn. I'll admit that I'm not as witty, well-spoken, and loquacious as some people in the distant right. So I was reading a book on Walter Payton, who was a leading running back for the Chicago Bears in the National Football League. And for many, many years, he was the only good player on his team. And so he would complain about that, but try to put up a brave face. But he would get all the attention in Chicago and in TV commentary and media commentary about the team because he was the one great player on the team. Then the team finally added a bunch of great players, and they went to the Super Bowl, and they won the Super Bowl. And he was just absolutely lost because he was not the center of attention. He didn't play particularly well, and he didn't get to score a touchdown. And so his team finally won the Super Bowl, but he was deeply unhappy because he was no longer the center of attention. So you have an intellectual depth that Nick Fuentes and most of these alt-right commentators do not have. So what's it like for you, when you see the tens of thousands of people who tune into someone who's your intellectual inferior?
I'm happy for them. I mean, if somebody like Nick Fuentes I think generally speaking, he's pushing a relatively sane and sensible idea of nationalism, and I'm very happy to see somebody like that do well. I'm not so happy to see somebody like Andrew Anglin or the right stuff doing well, and of course they're not doing so well these days, which is a good thing. So people with good, healthy ideas, whether they're my intellectual superior or my intellectual inferior, that's not really relevant. As long as they have good, healthy ideas and they're doing well, then I'm happy for them. And if they don't have good ideas, if they have toxic ideas which are going to cause harm or going to poison the well for the rest of us, then I'm quite happy to see them go down in flames.
But you start your essay saying, I'll admit I'm not as witty, well-spoken, and loquacious as some people in the dissident right. So how much value do you put on witty, well-spoken, loquacious, like people like a Richard Spencer, even a Greg Johnson, and Nick Fuentes? They're incredibly glib, like beautiful words just flow from their mouths. Now, often what they have to say is just wrong, toxic, cheap, attention-seeking or nonsense, but they do sound great. So how do you deal with a world that tends to value people who sound great as opposed to people who are doing great with their words?
How do you deal with a world that likes kind of glib, shallow characters? Well, it's not a surprise, first of all. I mean, this is something that has been well known for centuries and been much commented upon. And, that's fine. There's a lot of suckers. They're going to fall for certain types of smooth talking personalities. There's certain kinds of sociopathic narcissists around who nevertheless have a certain kind of charisma. And, that's going to draw certain people to them. But I think we've got to focus on the ideology much more and the ideas that pertain to a healthy society. That's how you build movements, with ideas, not with personalities. Personalities destroy movements, it seems, but ideas build movements.
Do you automatically distrust, say, people who are glib?
Well, I think probably we have an instinct. Well, some of us have an instinct to do so. Basically, I distrust everybody until I have a reason to actually trust them.
Is that a Scottish thing?
Well, I don't know. It might well be, but it's not confined to Scotland. I think this characteristic can be found in a lot of other cultures. You can see the same thing in Aesop's fables, which is Phrygian and from like 3,000 years ago.
Okay, this is an important essay you wrote, Chinese Burn. Let me read a little bit more. Words, of which we clearly have too many today, are becoming increasingly cheap, but where I really score over the sub-masculine telegenics who dominate the vlogosphere that now defines dissident politics is in the brutal efficiency of my intelligence. This means that I not only avoid getting drawn into sterile and retarded intellectual positions, as happened to the rump alt-right, but also that my predictions and judgments tend to have an extremely high incidence of accuracy and utility. This efficiency is based on a number of factors, the most important of which is avoiding time and intelligence-draining detail when and where possible. So this is great. So you did not get sucked into all the hysteria over the coronavirus. You quickly concluded it was just a new kind of flu and not even a particularly deadly one, and that the real virus was the mental one that tapped into the latent hysteria of the multicultural West and the wider world. Are there any other thinkers who you feel that you're on a similar wavelength, either with regard to COVID-19 or with regard to your general approach?
I'm guessing there are some people who are pointing in the same direction, but I think my conclusions are kind of well based in this respect. So, anything in the news that has grabbed your attention aside from American politics over the past, say, 3 weeks since we spoke last? Well, it's mainly been American politics and, a bit of Black Lives Matter and coronavirus lockdowns and the second wave. There's people are talking about the second wave in a lot of places. And I think in Britain, they're very worried about the second wave. And they're From what I'm hearing about Britain, there's a lot of confusion because, first of all, nobody really seems to understand the restrictions. They keep changing them all the time. There's local variations. For example, in Scotland and Wales, they have regional governments that do things differently from the rest of the UK. And then the British government is imposing local lockdowns according to wherever there's a spike. And so it's very, very confusing for most people who tend to be very kind of low information. They don't really pay attention to all the latest dictates coming out of Westminster or Holyrood. So I think one of the things that struck me was the Swedish response was efficient because they decided on a range of measures that they advised people to take, and they didn't really chop and change that. And so people knew where they stood. They knew more or less what they should do. Whereas in the case of Britain, when you're always moving the goalposts all the time, people just lose interest in the game. And so, I think that's a very poor way of managing this so-called crisis. And I think we're starting to see the Boris Johnson's government exposed as increasingly incompetent.
So Jim Goad tweets, since the editor at Tacky Mag has been aggressively neutering my writing for years now, today's feature will be my last for Tackies. Greg Johnson at Countercurrents has offered to match what they were paying me, so look for my columns there soon. Do you have any thoughts on Jim Goad and his leaving Tackies Mag for Countercurrents?
Yeah, I'd say that Jim should definitely exaggerate what Tackies was paying him and get Greg Johnson to match it.
Yeah. So, what do you think of Jim Goad?
Well, he's a good friend of yours, I believe, so I've got to be polite and choose my words carefully.
No, this is a free speech zone.
Well, to be honest, I've never really been a fan of his writing. I read the Redneck Manifesto and I couldn't finish it. I just found it a bit boring. He's written a lot of columns for Tackies. Occasionally I've looked at them and I've never really learned anything from his columns, unfortunately. He's got a rather unpleasant personality from what I can see. He's got a lot of issues. He's got a bit of an interest in history. I've got nothing against him personally, but I don't really find him particularly interesting. He's kind of a bit of an edgy, edutarian type. He's trying to be edgy, and I guess trying to be edgy, he kind of he's sort of cozied up with it with certain elements of the alt-right, the rump alt-right. And I think probably Tackies are, a bit wary of that. They don't want to be, they have a particular slot in mind which they want to fill. They want to be a bit edgy, but kind of safe edgy. And Jim Goad probably goes a little bit into the kind of taboo areas a little bit. So they're trying to gently push him out, it seems. I think they're probably much happier with somebody like David Cole, because I think David Cole is, first of all, he's a very good writer. He often writes very entertaining, columns, but also he's almost mainstream in many ways, despite his Holocaust revisionist background.
Yeah. And you've got an interesting essay here talking about that the problem with America and the wider West is an excess of logic. And that is what is generating the endless hysteria we keep seeing on the streets, TV screens, and social media. And this is a fascinating way of putting it, because people, once they start from flawed premises and they become very, very logical, then it takes them to absurd places, as opposed to people who have more of a sense of trust in their basic instincts or more of a sense of trust in just abiding by either the traditional ways of doing things or abiding by the norms of the tribe. But now we've got logic, unhinged from traditional ways of looking at life. Would you like to elaborate a little?
Yeah, I think there is an excess of logic. People have actually they're taking the premises, these fuzzy premises that have kind of underlain Western civilization, especially since the end of World War II, and they've taken them literally, and they've shone a spotlight on these premises, and they're saying, right, so racial equality is absolute. therefore each group has to have equal outcomes. If each group doesn't have equal outcomes, there must be some sort of racism at work. This is an entirely logical conclusion if you believe the initial premise of group racial equality, this kind of group communism, as I sometimes refer to it. Our culture, which is driven by social media, which the mainstream media kind of also follows through on, has been pushing these ideas to their ridiculous conclusion. And in a way, that might be a good thing, because if you have flawed premises and then you reduce them to the absolute absurdities that they are, then people, logic is a two-way process. Once you do that, then people look back on the premises and they realize those premises are deeply flawed. Then there's the possibility that they might uproot those premises and base society on something else.
How's Boris Johnson and his government doing, trying to negotiate their split from Europe?
I find the whole process extremely boring now. After Brexit dominating British politics for years and years, I just kind of like, God Almighty, just get it done. And it sounds like they're having a few problems. I don't know the details, but there was a bit of a backbench rebellion. They thought that Boris was cutting a few diplomatic corners. There was some messy compromise. The Europeans and the British government, they have to just cobble something together. They've got enough problems as it is. They don't need another problem. They don't need kind of serious trade friction between Britain and Europe. The Germans definitely don't want that. I don't think Boris Johnson wants that. But, they might think, wait a minute, this Boris Johnson, he's not all he's cracked up to be. Maybe we can push Britain into a corner. Because I think Boris has lost a bit of his bounce, so that might become a factor as well. Hopefully not, though.
How competent do you expect Boris Johnson to be as a Prime Minister?
Really, I think it depends on the rest of his cabinet. Because I think Boris Johnson, one of the things that he seemed to be doing when he first came in, which was a good thing, was he seemed to be taking a step back from the day-to-day running of things and delegating more. I think an effective Prime Minister shouldn't be too enmeshed in the day-to-day dramas of government, and he should be delegating a lot more. And he should be sitting back, taking a wide picture. I think in Boris Johnson's case, he seemed to lose his mojo, as it were, when he was hit by the coronavirus personally. And, I think figures like Dominic Cummings and Michael Gove are very important. And, they're obviously much more intelligent than Boris. And it depends on the kind of the chemistry and the dynamics in the cabinet. There are a lot of poor quality appointees, I've noticed. I'm not very impressed by Priti Patel. I'm not very impressed by Rishi Sunak. I'm not very impressed by Dominic Raab. These people are all a bit wishy-washy. Matt Hancock, who's I think he's the health minister or something. All these people seem a little bit out of their depth. The most intelligent person in the cabinet is probably Michael Gove.
And what do you think of Dominic Cummings?
Yeah, I think he's obviously quite smart, and he has a kind of meta view of politics. I think that's the correct approach, and I think they've lost sight of that a little bit. They've become enmeshed in all this kind of normie politics, and I think they've got to reform the civil service. They've got to take the BBC to the edge of the cliff and push it over. They've got to do all these things that affect the political environment that they have to exist within. Because this is what, as we see in America, the cultural political environment has an enormous impact. When you have the media, with their thumb on the scales, as it were, when you have the so-called independent judiciary with its thumb on the scales, all these things can have an enormous impact, and they can completely overturn the democratic mandate.
Have you been reading any good books lately?
Oh yeah, I've got a great book. I'm actually rereading this because this is a book I read years and years ago. Humphrey Clinker by Tobias Smollett. Are you familiar with this novel?
No.
It's an 18th century novel, and it's completely in letter form. It's one letter after another, written by different characters, which carry the story forward.